So I have been gone a cool hard 9 months. Sorry to anyone who, cares. It's been a rough year to say the least. But the continued support I have from you amazing people is just highly appreciated, even if 100% undeserved on my part. I cannot thank you enough for bringing this channel this far. But we aren't here to talk about my personal accomplishments, are we? We're here to talk about South Park Season 6. And what a unique season we have on our hands this time. Seriously, this might be South Park's most unique and experimental season to date. Kenny's not here throughout most of it, Stan, Kyle, and Cartman are between teachers and fourth friends, and the show loves playing with the viewer's expectations with things like the new Terrence and Phillip movie trailer, and pretty much anything having to do with Butters and Tweek. It's also a pretty unique season in the sense that, up till this point, previous seasons have introduced a lot of newcomers. Rather than throwing in a bunch of newcomers, though, Season 6 is a lot more interested in developing the characters that we've already have established. And speaking of characters, I suppose that's the perfect segue to get into talking about, the characters. With the main characters, even though the show does a little bit of playing around with the audience's expectations as to, how the characters will respond to certain things, there's really not going to be a whole lot of massive surprises this year. Stan's still the go-to sensitive one of the main group. In fact, in my humble little onion, the episode Fun with Veal pretty much cements him as the show's main emotional mouthpiece. Stan might not technically be the smart one of the group, that honor goes to Kyle, but he is sort of the strongest-willed and most self-aware. Speaking of, Kyle seems to have adopted a more passive and mellowed-out attitude this year. Like, this year, Kyle doesn't really get into any fights with Cartman, aside from the couple of times where he kicks his ass. He also doesn't really give any big moral speeches like he usually tends to like to do. Just in general, the show likes to play Kyle up as the smart one, at least of the main four, so it's nice to see them switching it up this year with episodes like Bebe's Boobs and Biggest Douche in the Universe. Just stuff to show that even though Kyle might, on paper, be the smartest one of the main four, he's not always the most sensible. Cartman is certainly handled interestingly this year. And Season 5 sort of cements Cartman as the show's evil psychopath character, so one might be surprised to learn that this is also a pretty passive year for Cartman, all things considered. Don't get me wrong, this isn't like Season 2, where South Park has this weirdly soft and cuddly version of Cartman. And make no mistake, Cartman is still a bigot through and through this season too, but more than showing off how evil he is, the show seems more interested in highlighting how selfish and childish he is. To be honest, this is kind of my favorite portrayal of Cartman. It's sort of this approach where he's got the makings of an evil genius, but he's too incompetent to follow through with anything. Now, you might think that's it, but no, we still actually have a couple of main characters to go through. As you all know, Kenny is dead forever, never coming back until the end of the year, so someone has to step up and take his place. And that initial someone to step up and take Kenny's place is Butters. Now, this being Butters' first year as a main character on the show, he's really not going to say or do anything that you wouldn't expect him to. Everything he does this year is fairly typical Butters stuff. Even when he tries to be a supervillain, he's too big of a sweetheart to have a dark side. And even when Stan, Kyle, and Cartman try to get rid of him, they really can't shake him as the show's new main character. Butters is here to stay, and I couldn't be happier. And then there's also Tweek. Good old Tweek. A lot of people think I hate Tweek. And sure, I do like to rip on Tweek because he replaced Butters as Kenny's replacement. And if a sizable amount of this community can jabber on about how modern South Park has been ruined by this, that, or the other, then I can be petty about this. That being said, if anybody is going to replace Butters as Kenny's replacement, Tweek probably makes the most sense. He's another character voiced by Matt, he doesn't talk a lot, much like Kenny, and the boys are willing to treat him like a prop. So, yeah. As they emphasize over and over in Professor Chaos, they're not really looking for a fourth friend so much as they're looking for another Kenny. And I think we could probably all agree that Tweek is the closest you can get to Kenny without being Kenny. To be honest though, I'm actually kind of surprised this year didn't cement Tweek as more of a main character, or at least a more prominent side character. I'm sure he doesn't say or do anything particularly hilarious this year, but I don't know, you'd think by him being the fourth friend for even less than half a season, you'd think he'd land at least a little bit more of a prominent role throughout the rest of the show. After Season 6 ends though, he pretty much slips into the background until he gets together with Craig. Almost makes me wonder if someone in the writer's room doesn't like him. And that's about it as far as main characters go this year, but there are still a couple of characters to keep an eye on. For instance, despite the fact that Randy Marsh is still a little bit a ways away from landing main character status, this is the year it's clear that Matt and Trey have figured out that he's their favorite of the dad characters. I think it's fairly safe to say that from this point onwards, Randy is the show's next big ladder-climbing character. Also, I mentioned earlier that this season doesn't really introduce a whole lot of newcomers, and in fact, they actually kind of trim the fat in a sense. No, that's not a rude body-shaming joke, I'm just saying that they got rid of a character. As that's right, after getting off on a decent foot onto a rocky at best tenure on the show, Diane Chokes-on-Dick was confirmed dead on April 10th, 2002. She will be dearly missed by only Mr. Mackey and pretty much nobody else. Nobody liked her as a character. Speaking of, Mr. Mackey actually takes over as interim 4th grade teacher after Miss Chokes-on-Dick dies. It's really only a temporary gig, though, while Principal Victoria ponders rehiring Mr. Garrison. Which she does, and Mr. Garrison happily obliges, taking back the reign as the 4th grade teacher with a new teacher's ass, Mr. Slave. And Mr. Slave is an entertaining enough character, along with the other big newcomer of this year, Twong Lee Kim. But that's about it as far as new people. Also, Wendy does absolutely nothing of any worth this year except calls Baby a slut, which goes on to prove a point that I'm pretty sure we all already knew, and that's that Wendy has a serious jelly streak. In general, this seems like the year the show mostly figures out who the regulars are, who the side characters are, and who's relegated to just background characters. This is also the point in the show where they're seemingly trying to figure out a lot of other groups of characters, or factions, if you will. You'll just notice things like the parents of South Park start hanging out together a lot more, or other groups of kids besides the main 4 start forming. It's nice to see the world of South Park evolve alongside the characters, even if it's not exactly called attention to. And that's about it as far as the characters go here. I could go on about the few newcomers this season offers, like Mr. Slave, or Lee Kim, or PC Principal. Oh, the ski instructor isn't PC Principal, it just sounds exactly like him? Oh, my mistake. But all the hilarious characters are only a part of what makes the show so great. It's arguable, though, that the most important part of South Park is the humor. So how well does that stack up this year? Well, if you liked the previous seasons, I say there's no reason you shouldn't like this season. They still love making fun of anything and everything under the sun, especially stuff that people hold sacred, and they still love making fun of celebrities, even celebrities that are friends of the show like Russell Crowe, who both Matt Stone and Trey Parker are apparently on friendly terms with. Actually, I think this might be the year that South Park begins to double down on making fun of celebrity culture in other shows. Obviously, that's an aspect that's been an element of the show since the very beginning, but I don't know, I start to notice it a lot more around this point. Despite that, doubling down on the whole, being mean to celebrities or whatever, I actually feel like by this point in the show, they start making a lot more conscious efforts to not come across as one-sided. Apart from the episode where, they spent the whole time ripping on giant douche John Edwards, they usually tend to offer up arguments from both sides in a lot of these episodes. Like, yeah, they'll have giant douche John Edwards actually get the biggest douche in the universe award, or they'll have Steven Spielberg and George Lucas actually be full-on villains in Free Hat. In general, though, Season 6 isn't all that interested in offering up moral philosophies. It's more interested in making you laugh. This year, there are actually a lot of examples like Jared Has AIDS, or Aspen, or Simpsons Already Did It, where they actually kind of just take one gag and build an entire episode around it. Even this season's big emotional episode, A Ladder to Heaven, is a big joke fest. If there's one area where Season 6 undoubtedly trumps everything that's come prior, it's the jokes. You'll notice that unlike my previous retrospectives, I'm not listing off a whole lot of jokes from this season, and that's for a particular reason. More so than before, me just listing off the jokes of this season would honestly be doing you a disservice. There's a lot of laughs to be had here, especially if you're a South Park fan. That's really one thing this season does well, is that it's simultaneously very rewarding to South Park fans, but yet I also feel like it's a good entry-level season for someone who's new to the show to start at. Aside from maybe the knowledge of Kenny's quote-unquote permanent death in the previous year, none of the episodes in Season 6 really demand any prior knowledge of South Park to be enjoyed. Prior knowledge of the show often makes some gags funnier, or, builds on to a joke that was previously set up. And even for as experimental Season 6 is, even by the end of it, it seems like the show is keen to try and slowly work its way to resetting everything back to normal. By episode 14 in particular, the show really is obviously starting to work its way to resetting back to the status quo. All topped off by Kenny just abruptly reappearing back into the show at the very end of the last episode of the season. Merry Christmas! Kenny's explanation as to where he's been the whole time always cracks me up. I'm not going to tell you what he says, you can figure it out for yourself. There are just so many reasons why I love Season 6. Obviously it helps that this is a very Butters-heavy season. I mean, hell, even when he's fired from being the fourth friend, he still manages to weasel his way into every single episode of the year, minus Christmas. And that's not even to mention probably the biggest highlight of the year, depending on who you ask, and then that's that Season 6 is the year that Professor Chaos was born. I like that the show loved the concept so much they did 2 episodes about it back-to-back that aren't really technically a two-parter. All in all, I think this season just has the perfect balance of subversive, fresh comedy that is previously unexplored by the show, and it never goes far enough that it sort of alienates fans of the show or falls flat like some of South Park's other especially experimental seasons. To me, this is the best lineup of episodes they've ever had for a season. There's not a single meh episode or not a single one that I'd kind of just rather skip over. Now, in the interest of maybe not writing Season 6's dick so hard, let's switch things up a little. Here are a couple of things I noticed about the season that, I don't know, maybe they're not quite flaws so much as they are nitpicks, but whatever. They're just kind of some things that I noticed that didn't really detract from the viewing experience to me, but I don't know, maybe to you they would. The big one being that as a result of this season's quick, ever-changing nature, neither Butters nor Tweek are really given a fair shot as the fourth friend. As I mentioned earlier, Tweek especially got it hard considering he pretty much fell off as a character until later on in the show. In terms of usage, I mean. Butters is technically cut an easier deal because, like I said, even when he's fired, he still remains a big part of the show, and he's still a main character to this day. The other thing that kind of caught me a little off guard is how at the start of the season, Stan and Kyle kind of treat Butters a little callously, at least more so than I would expect from them. Like, I would expect Cartman to be a dickhead to Butters, that's pretty much their dynamic, but it just, it's a bit jarring, especially considering that, less than a year later, they would pretty much reach the conclusion that Stan and Kyle like Butters, and, they're willing to stick up for him and treat him well. It's just a bit weird that the show kind of tries to initially play this angle where none of them like Butters. Like I said, neither of those two things are something that's gonna ruin the whole entire season for you, I think. But, just some things I noticed nevertheless. And that's all she wrote for this one. What do you think of Season 6? Do you think Kenny should have stayed dead? I don't know why you would think that, you sick fuck. No, but seriously, as usual, I would love to hear what you have to think about this season. If you agree with me, disagree with me, or whatever. Remember, don't ever cheat on your taxes, and be good to each other, and hasta la pasta.